Welcome to Rambam In-Depth. Today we'll be discussing the Rambam Hilchos Chametz and Matzah Perek Zayin Halacha Yud Aleph. The Rambam paskins as follows: Charoset mitzvah midibrei seifrim. That charoset on the night of Pesach is a mitzvah midrabanan, and the reason for it is zeicher letit. This is a remembrance of the mortar shehaya eivdin bein Mitzrayim. The Jews had to create bricks with mortar, and the charoset resembles the mortar, so that's why we have to have Charoset. It's a mitzvah with the Rabbanan. So the Magid Mishnah says that there's bemis machlokes in the Gemara in the Mishnah, Daf Kuf Yudalid Amud Aleph in the Masechta Pesachim. The Tanna Kamma says Apal Pisha Ein Charoset mitzvah, that it's not a mitzvah. However, Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok says mitzvah, and the halacha k'meisei, and the halacha is like Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok, that it is a mitzvah. Why does the Rambam paskin like that opinion against the Tanna Kamma? So the Mishnah explains, because in the Gemara there's a machlokes why we have charoset, if it's zeicher letit or it's zeicher letapuach. The tapuach is the apple trees under which the women heroically gave birth when they were in Mitzrayim. The fact that the Gemara is shakal v'tari and it discusses this issue, which is only true for the one who says it's a mitzvah, shows that the Gemara was leaning in favor of Elazar bar Tzadok. The Lechem Mishnah asks him two very strong questions. Number one, he says, the Rambam paskins like Elazar bar Tzadok, because the Magid Mishnah says that it is a mitzvah. The Rambam says clearly, mitzvah, charoset mitzvah divrei seifrim. But he says, sir, contradicts himself in Pirush Mishnayos. In Pirush Mishnayos, he says that according to Elazar bar Tzadok, you have to make a bracha, shekadashana b'mitzvah v'tzivanu al achilas charoset. And the Rambam says clearly, ve'ein halacha k'meisei. The halacha is not like him. Why is the halacha not like him? Because we don't make a bracha on charoset, so it's not a mitzvah. So there the Rambam says it's not a mitzvah, and here he says it's a mitzvah. So that question he answers by saying, Chazabay, the Rambam changes opinion. Sometimes it happens that the Rambam writes something in his comment, in his svarim that he wrote earlier, like the Pirush Mishnayos, and he was chayzer in the Mishneh Torah. But then the Lechem Mishnah asks a stronger question. Why don't we make a bracha? The Rambam changed his mind and says, yes, it's a mitzvah, but the Rambam in Pirush Mishnah said clearly that if it's a mitzvah, you have to make a bracha ala chilas charoset. And we don't make a bracha. Why not? It's a mitzvah with the Rabbanan. We make a bracha on Mortar, even though Bismad Hazeh it's only with the Rabbanan. Even though you could say, yesh l'chalik, the Mortar was once deraisa, so it retains the bracha, even though it's only with the Rabbanan. But that's not a good enough answer, because we make brachas and other mitzvahs that are Rabbanan. The Lechem Mishnah doesn't enumerate them. We make bracha on Megillah, make bracha on Neres Chanukah, on Shabbos Kodesh. So we do make brachas and mitzvahs with the Rabbanan. So why don't we make a bracha? If the Rambam paskins that it's a mitzvah, he changes opinion, there should be a bracha. So there's a very beautiful answer given by Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev's son, Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir was a predeceased Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, and he wrote a sefer called Kesed Torah, and he has Chedushim on the Rambam there. And he says that there's no steer whatsoever. But first he answers the second question. The second question is, why isn't there a bracha on al-chilas charoset? So he says the reason for it is very simple. Charoset, the Rambam says, is zeicher letit. There are two opinions, but the Rambam says it's zeicher letit. The tit represents the mortar, the bitter slave labor that they had to produce mortar for the bricks. He says that's nichlal in the bracha you make on mortar. Mortar is a general category of all the bitterness that we experience as slaves in Egypt, and one of the details of the bitterness was that they had to make mortar. So since you make a bracha on the mortar, that already includes the charoset. That's if you say that the reason is zeicher letit, but the Rambam makes it clear that the reason is zeicher letit, and because it's zeicher letit, you don't have to make a bracha. But that seems to be contradicted. In Pirush Mishnayos, the Rambam says that according to Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok, you have to make a bracha because it's a mitzvah, and yet over here he holds that because it's a mitzvah, even though it's a mitzvah, you don't make a bracha because it's included in the Mortar. So he says if you're medayik in the lashon of the Rambam Pirush Mishnayos, he says no such thing. The Rambam says that l'daita, according to Elazar bar Tzadok, you make a bracha. What is he saying, l'daita, according to him? He should have said daita, his opinion. Why does he say l'daita? He says because Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok doesn't say you have to make a bracha. He says if you say it's a mitzvah, and you follow the opinion of Rabbi Levi that says that the zeichel tapuach. Tapuach has nothing to do with bitterness. Tapuach has to do with the women who gave birth. It's the opposite of bitterness. That's the chayrus that they experienced, you could say. In that case, you would have to make a bracha. You can't say it's included in Mortar. Mortar is bitterness. This is not bitterness. So the Rambam in Pirush Mishnah is saying, I mean, in halachic, we don't follow the opinion that it's bezeichel tapuach. We follow the opinion that it's zeichel tit. And since we follow zeichel tit, even though it's a mitzvah, there's no chiyuv bracha. And vein halacha, the halacha is not like Rabbi Levi. Not the halacha is not like Elazar bar Tzadok. The Rambam holds like Elazar bar Tzadok that it is a mitzvah. Elamai, it's a mitzvah that doesn't require a bracha because it's nichlal in the bracha of Mortar.